I used to be really into boxing when I was younger. I trained when I was in high school, and I even did a couple of bouts, but I found out early on that I suffered from chronic migraines, and getting hit in the head is not particularly conducive with keeping them at bay. These days I'm not into it as much because a history of rampant match fixing and collusion and other fun stuff has made me cynical about the sport in general, and if I'm gonna sit down and watch something with a predetermined outcome, I'll just watch wrestling, since all the non-WWE promotions are having a heyday right now. But when I was into boxing, one of my favorite fighters was Eric Esch. You may know him better as Butterbean. I mean, I also know him better as Butterbean. That's how everyone knows him. It's a sick handle. It's not like we're friends or anything. Cool guy though. On top of just being a generally good dude and exceptionally hard worker, Butterbean also had astronomical power behind his punches. He was a force of nature, but he's not exactly the portrait of a conventional athlete.
Butterbean okay?
Butterbean is a heavy dude and would struggle badly in any fight that went into late rounds. People wanted to see Butterbean fight, and people wanted to fight him because he was a draw. And being a draw affords you certain advantages, and if you wanted a shot at the bean, you needed to agree to his conditions. His manager had the masterstroke marketing plan of getting other boxers to agree to short fights with very, very few rounds. This way Butterbean could be explosive and entertaining for the entire fight without the worry of being completely gassed by round 8, where he would not only lose almost all of his steam, but also put himself in a dangerous position to do damage to his heart. If an opponent agreed to the shorter fight, Butterbean got to go all out from start to finish, and the crowd got to see him at his best. Everyone wins, except for, his opponent most of the time. All competitive endeavors have a metagame. It's not just a video game term, it exists in everything. You wouldn't sprint at the beginning of a long distance race just like you wouldn't pace yourself in the 100 meter. Different strategies are important based on the parameters of the competition. Butterbean excelled in a format with only 4 rounds but didn't have stamina for longer fights, and our subject for this video is much of the same. Dragon is definitely a fan favorite monster. His stats position him as a pillar of brutality and offensive force, being the only monster with maximum power and intelligence gains. And people like doing a lot of damage, so that's a plus. Big numbers make your brain juices go, I like that. Tecmo played heavily into Dragon's theme of this is a special unlockable monster and he's super strong and you're gonna fuck up all your opponents with him, and also he is a cool dragon. When you're new and playing the single player campaign, most of your opponents had ranges where you felt safe in, but to unlock Dragon you had to fight Lagorus. Add in stats that make absolutely no sense for a B rank monster, and this is probably one of the first times you really felt like nowhere was safe. And that's kind of the point. Dragon's entire strategy revolves around ending the match as quickly as possible, and being a cool dragon. Because if he doesn't, well, it gets really bad really quick. Dragon is the first monster we've talked about that changes in usefulness significantly based on the meta you play him in. In the Japanese meta, he's exceptionally powerful, but as stat caps rise, so do the length of the average match, and as the time remaining gets lower and lower, so too do Dragon's hopes of victory. Dragon has the single worst guts regeneration rate of any monster in the entire game, meaning that his resource generation is the slowest in the game. Unfortunately, the worst subbreed for most monsters who have one is their Dragon sub, because of how hard it tanks their guts regeneration. In casual play, Dragon subs can boost the offensive stat gains of any monster, and make them into a cool dragon. So it's not as doom and gloom outside of the context of competitive play, but I'm just here to give you the facts. You don't have to like it, but it is what it is. With slow guts regeneration comes the creeping realization that you get fewer chances to attack than your opponent, and as time goes on that discrepancy in chances gets bigger and bigger. You're not winning if you're not attacking, and a single expensive miss can ensure that Dragon never gets a second chance. Because of this, Dragon ends up in a weird limbo in the 4-stat meta, where his explosive techs are reserved for only the bravest of us, and his much more reliable techs can't secure a KO fast enough to keep his opponents at bay. In the max stat meta, even the explosive techs stop mattering as much because dropping 50 guts on a successful gamble no longer even guarantees a victory. The Japanese meta also benefits Dragon disproportionately due to the version of the game it's played on. The monster AI in the Switch port of Monster Farm 2 does not require 45 guts to attack, whereas the normal PSX version of the game will not allow a monster to attack with lower than this amount under normal conditions. The 45 guts threshold is prohibitive to Dragon most of the time, and the removal of it acts as a literal delimiter of Dragon's potential. Fast guts regeneration isn't the only important part in the game though, and other slow guts monsters help define high stat cap metas. Guts correction affords Dragon the highest passive bonuses in the game, along with all the other 18 guts rate monsters, meaning he becomes unkillable and does horrifying damage should he sit on a large amount of guts. You're probably never going to, but I mean, it's the thought that counts, I suppose. If even incredible guts correction isn't enough to help out Dragon, then what's the issue? Unfortunately, Dragon's techs hold him back significantly. They aren't the worst in the game, but in general they are really unnecessarily expensive for what they do, when you factor in his inability to build up resources. Like every other monster we talked about so far, we're going to get the worst out of the way first and talk about Dragon's basic techs. Tail Whip. I mean, just look at these numbers. 17 force and +5 hit for 11 guts it's great. This is great. What the fuck? Tail Whip is incredibly cost efficient. Dragon's slow regen makes 11 a significantly higher cost than it looks like at first glance, but this tech stands alone as one of the single most powerful basic techs in the entire game. While most monsters cringe at the thought of having to hold on to their basic techs, Dragon actually benefits should he choose to spam Tail Whip. Okay, we're off to a good start, not too bad. But Dragon also has both his basics in the same slot, meaning you can't rely on only Tail Whip to be the only attack he uses in slot 1. Bite does way less damage and costs more for some reason. I guess Dragon just can't catch a break. Oh, wait. Hold on, I typoed here. One sec. Bite's got plus 10 hit, which makes it the third most accurate basic tech in the entire game after Hair's 1-2 punch and Undine's Cold Fog. But additionally, Dragon has Guts Correction helping him out to a level where it easily surpasses Undine and comes close to matching Hair. Most of the time I'd still prefer my Dragon to use Tail Whip, but Bite's only playing second fiddle because the other basic is so overtuned. But its basics both have tech chains. How are the upgrades? Also good, apparently. Tail attack is probably the best use of 16 guts in the game. 23 force and plus 5 hit genuinely seems like a mistake. It doesn't do any withering and has no extra chance to crit, so I'm assuming Tecmo factored that into the low cost, but Dragon doesn't really care about withering, and a chance to crit is never more important than higher base damage, so Dragon gets to reap the rewards. This is all but necessary to pick up on the majority of Dragon builds. 2 bites is fine in a vacuum, but in the context of the other 3 basics it has to compete with, it falls a little bit short. The chance to wither 13 guts on hit is enticing and it's still got plus 7 hits, so maybe it's got some undiscovered niche use. It's not unusable by any means, it's just outclassed. Okay, but we're done with the basics. Wing attack is also good. It's similar to 2 bites, though it trades a bit of potential damage output for an incredible 14 hit. Most moves that have this level of accuracy for the cost do very little damage, and while Wing attack isn't a powerhouse, it's reliable for securing wins, especially against monsters with low life. Against tanks, this move still has enough output to be usable, but its cost becomes a bit exorbitant as its main boon is the high accuracy, and that's wasted. Wing Combo is legit just Wing Attack 2.0. It's got a better cost ratio, doing more damage compared to its cost without sacrificing any accuracy. It also gets a tiny boost to Withering, making this move a straight upgrade to Wing Attack. But here's where things get dicey for your boy Dragon. A lot of Dragon's techs have good numbers beside them, but what I assume is a conscious effort to add weight and grandeur to the techs of such a majestic and powerful monster. He is a cool dragon. Many of Dragon's techs have prohibitively long animation times. They look super cool, but being cool is hard work, and the cinematic nature of his techs ends up kneecapping their usefulness. Wing Combo is great if it's used as the final attack needed to secure a victory, but used mid-match your opponent has a ton of time to build up guts and you're often in a precarious spot and vulnerable to a heavy counterattack after the move is over, hit or miss. So while parameter-wise the move is an improved wing attack, the context of a match drastically alters whether or not spending 22 guts is worth it. Note that the fastest guts rate dragons, Tiamat and Gidris, have a guts rate of 14, and will still take 10 seconds to build up 22 guts. I would never suggest getting Wing Combo on a purebred dragon, as this takes him an additional 4 seconds to do the same, and the move doesn't do nearly enough damage to make this a worthy investment. Dragon is a monster that thematically favors brute force over flawless technique, and that's apparent when you take a look at its sharp techs. Despite there being a lot of them, they range from sort of okay at best to legit garbage at worst. Dragon Punch is pretty bad. It doesn't do a lot of damage even with a crit, and it isn't particularly accurate, and is in a slot with all of Dragon's basics, 3 of which are incredible. It also has a weird particle effect. This doesn't, affect it at all, but I just think it looks goofy. Not a lot is going on for it. Claw is very expensive for what it does. Banking on a crit is really the only reason you'd gamble on it, and like we talked about with Wing Combo, once you get into the 20 plus guts range for Dragon, you really gotta make sure you're getting your money's worth. 44% chance to roll a B-Force tech after the Fame and Bad Natured Stress bonuses is really not what Dragon needs at the price and accuracy point. A 30 guts cost makes Spinning Claw Dragon's 4th most expensive tech, which should indicate the risk you're taking by using it. It has the same 24 sharpness as Claw, which admittedly isn't too bad coming off a 34 force. If you're trying to nuke your opponent immediately, Dragon has a few other techs of this level of consistency to do so, as the -7 hit is not great, but is head and shoulders above his heavy techs. It's still a lot of guts to risk for the payoff though, and is absolutely not worth the cost if you don't proc a crit, so there's the real gamble. It's interesting to note that Claw and Spinning Claw have a bad natured requirement, which is neat since evil sharp techs are exceedingly rare. Normally if there's a nature requirement at the sharp errantry, it is a good one and not evil, so that's kind of cool. Glide Charge is Dragon's only good natured tech and is also his final sharp tech. So he's got both good and evil sharp techs. I think he's the only monster with this? I don't know, I'd have to take a look. This move does everything Claw wants to do, except better, but even then it's not really enough. It's especially accurate and has an incredible 27 sharpness, but 27 cost means you need to proc a crit to make using the move even worth it. Granted, on a bad-natured dragon this will happen 47% of the time, but you can really see how it struggles to live up to its cost without one when compared to Wing Combo, which costs less for the same force and 14 hit, or even Tail Attack, which costs just over half that of Glide Charge and still has a great chance to hit. Even with a crit, this still only gives you a low B-Force attack for almost 30 guts. This makes Glide Charge a tech without a real identity. Its hit and critical chance seem to appeal to people who want to avoid risk in their builds, but the cost implies otherwise. In practice, a single use ends up being closer to about 30% of your total resources for one match, so be warned. When framed this way, it makes it a bit more apparent that even at +9 hit without a crit, it loses a lot of its real usefulness. Heavy techs feel like they'd be more Dragon's speed, but they fall short as well. There's a strange issue with Dragon's techs if you're playing casually, and that issue is that a lot of them feel weaker than the force value would suggest. Outside of 3 or 4 techs, almost all of Dragon's C-Force or stronger techs fall close to the minimum requirement needed for that letter grade. So psychology, there's a discernible difference between C-Force and B-Force, but when you barely reach the requirement for a listed B, it can feel underwhelming. Claw Combo is a perfect example of this. B-Force for 19 guts sounds really great at first look, but 30 is the threshold for B, meaning it's barely strong enough to be listed as such. This move isn't terrible, it's relatively cheap for a decent amount of damage, offset by a pretty bad -10 hit, but you'll probably be a bit underwhelmed when it does eventually connect. You got better places to spend your guts elsewhere. Flying Combo is a perfect move to use and win a match on frame 1, if your opponent has low life, and if you get exceptionally lucky. 46 force is really not as much as it looks like at first glance. This is rarely enough to actually KO an opponent unless you have a guts lead. If your opponent misses a really expensive round opener, Flying Combo can secure a win, but still only got -15 hit. So even with everything going your way, you still need to beat the odds to actually land it in the first place. 25 cost makes this risky, but at least you're not going to fall too far behind too quickly on a miss. Trample is actually numerically essentially the exact same tech as Flying Combo. S-Force for 27 cost sounds insane, but at 50 it's the weakest an S-Force tech can possibly be, and -16 hit is debilitating. It has the same price point as Glide Charge, meaning that this is a huge chunk of your resources, close to 1/3, and if you gamble with Trample you have to accept that it's probably going to miss. It works as a desperation attack to steal a match in the waning seconds, but it's the antithesis of reliability. Dragon doesn't have a lot of variety in its heavy techs. They all serve the exact same purpose at different risk tiers, but they all exist in different slots, meaning no one heavy tech inherently outclasses another. Dragon's specials are interesting. Slamming Down, typo and all, is one of Dragon's most all-in techs. If you want a tech that does everything and is useful equally against almost all opponents, then this is the tech for you, but nothing's free on this bastard planet. Slamming Down is Dragon's second most expensive tech at 40, meaning in a normal battle it's unlikely you'll get to use this more than twice at most, and that's if you use nothing else. An even hit percent with Dragon's Guts Correction pushes this above 50% chance to hit as long as you're not badly trailing your opponent in guts, which is enticing. A decent amount of damage as well as a debilitating amount of withering helps keep this move consistent, but the withering is offset pretty significantly by Dragon's inability to keep pace and building guts with his opponent. This move will never give you a guts lead, but it can be pretty good for running out the clock should the round go to time. As an opener, the withering is what saves this tech from being completely useless, as otherwise the damage and cost is completely incongruent. The chances of you getting a one-shot kill with Slamming Down as an opener is practically zero, but landing one gives you a decent amount of damage without allowing your opponent to immediately retaliate. No one likes losing 30 to 40 guts, it doesn't matter how fast your guts rate is. Dragon Combo is Dragon's ultimate tech, and it's a Hail Mary. But, like, the Hail Mary is being thrown by a dude with no arms. This tech is horrendously expensive, but it's actually the third most powerful tech in the entire game at 65 force. With 25 to 35% chance to score a crit, you've got a really good chance to one-hit kill your opponent in every format outside of a max stats one. This is absolutely the best possible tech you can run to beat tanks, but a -20% hit makes it incredibly unlikely to hit anyone else. Guts Correction helps out minimally, but absolutely does not offset the insane 50 guts cost. An extremely long animation time mitigates a lot of the potential benefit from the withering should it not instantly kill, but you're not using Dragon Combo for the withering. The withering isn't why you're here. This is a wild move and is only usable in the hands of the truly depraved. There's no better tech for Dragon if your desire to make your opponent salty outweighs your desire to win consistently. Dragon's got maximum intelligence gains, but only 4 intelligence techs, and in only 2 slots, which drastically limits the usability of an intelligence build, unfortunately. Flutter is real expensive. It's incredibly accurate at +19 and does a solid amount of withering, but the damage is very low for 29 guts. You can think of this move as a more consistent Glide Charge, but Glide Charge has the 50% chance to crit going for it, whereas Flutter has the heavy withering. It's got a pretty quick animation, so you get back into the game quickly, but this tech really is a low yield investment. Consistent and great for building a lead, but you're limiting your potential damage output, so it's one of those techs that's better to use in the hands of a human player as opposed to the AI. Flooders gives you much better damage return on your investment, but the drastic increase in animation time really neuters any advantage you'd expect to pull from 15 Withering. At plus 14, Flooders is still very accurate. Dragon has nothing else in his entire kit at this level of damage and consistency, but the 33 cost makes this burdensome and unlikely to proc more than a few times throughout the entire round. And at roughly the same force as Claw combo, you won't ever be winning in a single hit, so let's hope you get more than one chance. What would a dragon be without the ability to breathe fire? Dragon's Withering techs do exactly that, which is cool because they don't do much else. Fire Breath's numbers aren't actually that bad when viewed outside the context of the monster they're stapled to. Minus 8 hit is sketchy, but 20 force and 25 withering for 20 cost is actually really solid. But Dragon doesn't really benefit from heavy withering unless he's fighting other monsters with extremely bad guts rates. This type of tech would need to be overpowered in the hands of another monster to be serviceable on Dragon, and it's definitely not that. Inferno is a round opener, and the chance to do 44 withering on a round start is pretty enticing, but just remember that the bulk of the huge 29 guts cost is spent justifying this high withering. The damage is low and the accuracy is bad. It also has an egregious 6+ second animation time on a successful hit. Pixie can gain 26 guts in this time frame for the record, which drastically reduces how notable the withering really is. Relying on withering means your opponent probably isn't going to instantly explode and will get chances for a comeback, a scenario that becomes more and more likely the longer the battle drags on. If the goal is victory, then scoring a KO is a significantly faster and more consistent way to do it with Dragon than draining your opponent's guts is. Okay, so enough talk about that. How do you build them? What are your options? In the Japanese 2997 meta, you're looking at something like this. This gives you some consistent damage output versus speedy monsters plus potential for burst damage through trample to take out tanks. You sort of want to avoid techs that are weak and accurate just for the sake of accuracy in this meta, as the lack of 45 guts threshold makes counterattacking more of a threat, and chip damage becomes less valuable. But given how strict a stat cap like 2997 is and how accurate wing attack is, you could maybe forgo some skill and slot it into life to pick up wing attack to cover this discrepancy. This meta is where Dragon is at its most flexible, and is arguably the only meta where investing in defensive stats over speed makes any sort of competitive sense for him. In the 4-stat meta, it looks a little bit more like this. Realistically, you could run the same build from the Japanese meta plus wing attack, but this gives you a bit more long-term utility if a fight looks like it's going to go the distance. Slamming down can be very useful, but the cost makes it a bit scary to use. It comes in at a significantly higher damage tier than Glide Charge, which often just doesn't do enough damage for its cost in a meta like this, and it's your main weapon against tanks. Tail Attack and Wing Attack are cheap options to both build up damage and close out a round. They're very cost efficient and won't lock you out of attacking for very long should they miss. This is a very safe and consistent build, which usually benefits Dragon more so than just rolling the dice at every opportunity, as he doesn't get many in practice. If you want to build an intelligence build, this is probably your best build, but I mean, it sucks. Godspeed. A thing I haven't actually mentioned yet in any of my videos because it hasn't come up is that an integral part of getting the techs you want, and only the techs you want, is through combination. It's completely possible to get the later techs in a tech chain without inheriting the prerequisites. This helps Dragon build a better intelligence loadout. Combining is complicated, so I'll just post a link to some info. Just know that it's possible to get both Inferno and Flutters without getting Flutter or Fire Breath on your build. Flutter and Fire Breath are skipped because the latter doesn't do nearly enough damage to prop up the rest of his kit, and Fire Breath is ass. It's just bad. This is an almost prohibitively expensive build and I don't recommend it, but like, you do you. As mentioned earlier, Tiamat and Gidris pull Dragon's guts rate up to 14, which is serviceable and not actually the slowest overall maximum guts rate for a breed in the game, despite Pure Breed Dragon having the slowest. In 2997 the matches are extremely coin flippy, so you can run a 0-speed Dragon, but as the stat cap gets higher you run into issues where anyone with even a small amount of withering can really ruin your day. Dragon's damage output isn't consistent enough to afford getting hit and losing guts, so it's almost always better to run high speed and low defense. Dragon is both an absolute terror and absolutely terrible, depending on the meta he's played in. He's widely considered one of the worst monsters in the high stat metas, but in 2997 there's a larger delta of variance and less consistency across the entire meta. Couple that with removal of the 45 guts limit and Dragon has a chance to YOLO wins through trample and still do his standard tail attack spam. And if you're a Dragon fan, and let's be real, we all are because he's a cool Dragon. This might be disheartening to hear, but fear not. In hard mode, Dragon is broken. he's stupid powerful. He's a top tier with a bullet and has drastically been reworked to fix all of his terrible nonsense. You should join the Monster Rancher Discord for more info on hard mode and getting involved in the scene. And, you know, raise a dragon that can actually win tournaments. Once again, I want to say thank you guys for watching these videos. I know it's been a little while since my last video and I haven't been uploading consistently. And that is because, you know, if you've been following along, I only started this channel because COVID kind of ruined my entire industry. And now, work is coming back, and so it's very, very hard for me to be consistent. But let me know in the comments what you want to see next. Do you want to see another monster? Is there something in particular you're interested in that's not a monster? These have been fun to make, but I do also want to make a video on combining. I want to make a video on item use and like proper paradox and intro run training. There's other videos that exist for them, but you know, I haven't made them, so that's what really matters.